Why do you think you were good at foreign affairs? You had never been abroad before except in the war. You had come from a relatively isolated, if not provincial, town in Southern California. You'd had limited exposure to world affairs, and yet from the very beginning you seemed to have an instinct or an intuition for it, which certainly carried on through the rest of your career to the presidency. What made you good at it?
Well, first, I would say it goes back to my education at Whittier. The study of history, the study of philosophy, the fact that even long before I went to Whittier, that my interest in geography. Geography deals with foreign affairs, not just where the countries are and all that sort of thing. And it also goes back to, frankly, the Quaker background, a passion for peace. You know, I've been in wars. World War II, of course, and I've been exposed to Korea and exposed to Vietnam and so forth and so on as a political leader. But there is nothing that has been more a motivating force in my life than to do something, whether in my service, whether in the House, the Senate, Vice President, or President, that would make the world possibly more peaceful. I know many of my critics, probably justifiably based on my record, will say, well, you certainly hadn't acted that way in decision making. But what I have attempted to do is to be quite pragmatic, recognizing that it isn't enough just to be for peace. You have to recognize that there are evil forces in the world that are not for peace, that there are aggressive forces, and that unless you stop that aggression, that you are not going to have a real peace. You have to recognize that if you, in the name of peace now, roll over in front of an aggressor, that may buy peace, not even in your time, but maybe in our time, but it ensures war at a later time, Munich being the prize example. And so, while I was for peace as a Quaker, I suppose I must say that I was always against appeasement, not because I was for war, but because I was for peace for the generation, for a century, rather than just peace in my own time. And that is what motivated me, and consequently going to Europe was an opportunity that was fantastic for me, to see what made the world work, to see what motivated people, to be able to understand them.
Beyond your intellectual background, though, it's always struck me and many observers as interesting about you that for someone who, in some cases with Americans or in American political situations, is uncomfortable or ill at ease, you seem to have an intuitive instinct for foreigners, that you know how they think, you say the right thing, you do the right thing, that you can negotiate, you can deal with them in an intuitive way. Is there any, have you ever thought about it in that way? Why?
Well, yeah, let me say it, since you apparently are too polite to say it. There are many people that say that I like foreigners better than I do Americans. And there are many people that say that can't understand when I go abroad, even after the trauma of Watergate and so forth, that I am received so favorably and so well in places like China and France and Austria, et cetera, et cetera. No, I think maybe that goes back to the early years. One of the great benefits, may I say, one of the fallouts of living in that little closed Quaker community was first the exposure to a splendid faculty who had a worldview and not a parochial view, and to grow up with people, with Japanese, with Mexicans, with Koreans, with Chinese. Let me tell you an interesting thing, not that it's particularly relevant to your question, that I recall vividly from my college days. This is back in 1933-34. At that time, the Japanese had invaded China, you know, in Manchuria. And I remember two of my best friends. One was Chinese in the Whittier College class, and the other was Japanese. These two virtually came to blows in the assembly that we were having when that subject came up. And I could see some of the great forces that fought each other in the world. Now, let's come to the feeling about foreigners. I think if I identify with them, it's because I see them as people, as individuals, more than simply sort of impersonal leaders representing nationalistic views. Let me put it more precisely. Everybody is quite aware of my anti-Soviet attitudes, my anti-communist attitudes, but when I went to the Soviet Union in 1959, along with Pat, I insisted, and it was hard to do, but I insisted from the Russians that I have the opportunity to go into plants, to meet people, to go down the streets and so forth and so on. Now, of course, they fenced me off pretty good, but I found that the Russian people were warm and strong. They're people that I wanted on our side rather than the other side. They're good people. I admire them. The same with the Chinese. When I went there, a great, you can think of China of 1 billion people. You can think of them as Maoists. You can think of them as hopeless communists and so forth, or very foreign. Or you can think of them for what they really are. They're really, frankly, more like us than the Russians, because they laugh somewhat similarly at the same jokes. Some way or other, I'm quite simpatico with the Chinese, with the Russians as well, but in a different way. I guess what we're really saying here is that fundamentally, I think every individual counts. And I think that whether it's in China or Russia or Indonesia or Ghana or Cairo, wherever you go, that if you can break past the official structures and get to see the people, and particularly the people not of the elite class. The elite class is the same all over the world. They go to the same parties and they drink the cocktails, etc., and they have the same snobbish characteristics any place, and they're not, and frankly, although I have many friends among them, they're not my dish of tea. But if you can get down and you meet the shopkeepers and the workers and the students and the rest, really get to talk to them, you'll find that there is out there a great common bond that brings us all together. Now, I'm speaking a bit too idealistic for the pragmatist I'm supposed to be, but that is the only way we eventually are going to bring this world together.